And we're live. Clean breakthrough coming back again. Full disclosure, this was supposed to be a mustache episode. We were all supposed to have mustaches. The topic was mustache. You a question. My fellow podcasters did not follow through. What happened?
We got him. We got him. Tricked him. You actually already had a mustache, though. Lucas and I just dropped the ball on that.
Well, and I have the worst mustache. Of the three of us, you two have the better mustache.
What?
Now I'm left alone to look like a peasant.
I didn't know that this was a thing. I didn't think it's the first time anybody ever said I have like a superior facial hair situation going on.
No, look at the gaps in this thing.
But it kind of works, though, for you, Dave. You know what I mean? Like, it kind of fits.
My wife would disagree with you. Well,
right.
we'll keep rocking and rolling as if this were Mustache Who a Question. These are questions that parents ask us as professionals who work in the field. Some of them are going to be directed toward maybe more me, Lucas, on sober living side. Some of them are going to be more directed toward clinical.
All
So
right.
we ready?
We ready, dude.
Wow.
First question, and this is a big one, a lot to unpack, but what makes Greenville Transitions different from other sober living programs? Let's go like with your first thought.
From other sober living programs, first thought is size.
Okay. Meaning
Elaborate.
all two of our listeners.
meaning it's a 10-bed facility for the main house and 6 beds for the step-up house. So 16 beds total for, if guys do both of those programs back to back and go to a year, that's not as many guys I normally see in sober living. A lot of them can have more. Not to say that there aren't that probably even have less or the same, but that's something that I think stands out to maybe the average sober living right off the rip. It's just that smaller size to where guys get more individual attention.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off that. The thing that came to my mind was specialized support, and that it is the sober living like designed specifically for younger adult men. Whereas other sober living might just be like all adult, or just like gender specific. This one tends to be more for guys in their 20s and 30s. And the support aspect of it is there's a lot of therapy that comes along with this sober living. So every guy had the therapist. Every guy goes through multiple levels of care that involve like therapy groups, psychiatry. There's 24/7 recovery coaching. So that paired with the size is a little bit different from a typical sober living situation, which honestly just tends to be more housing. Like this is a agreed upon sober house that people can live, but you have to get your own therapist outside of here, get your own sponsor, all that kind of stuff. At GT, these guys are very much like held accountable and provided the structure to have those supports. So that's like what comes to my mind. What about you, Dave? What do you think?
Yeah, same as you. I mean, the first place I went was the specificity of who we work with. And when you think of sober livings, a lot of times you think of all ages, from 18 to 82 or and beyond. But being age specific, and also just to throw in that failure to launch piece, because even though we take younger guys, we also may not take a 24-year-old who's married, has kids, has been rocking and rolling down a career path, but then stumbled into drugs and alcohol. It might look like a different program for them versus what we do, which is like more of the guy who has never gotten that stuff together. The career path, the relationships, the living in mom and dad's house still. What's so funny, Lucas?
No, it's all good. That's true. A very specific type of guy while being a young guy.
Young at heart. How about that?
It's taking another picture of you on my split screen where it splits right down the middle of your nose, and it looks
Oh
like
my gosh.
your head is 3 times as wide as it is. And I just every time I see it, I can't get enough of it.
With a mustache has to make it better.
Yeah, very Mario and Luigi. But yeah, I think like the size, the length of stay, the specificity of what we do, the level of structure, I think all those things together definitely make us maybe the most unique. Like not any one of those individual things. I think there's a lot of programs, but I don't think there's a lot of programs that do all of that in that way. Again, not to say that there's none, but I think that's a much more niche program.
Yeah. Okay, well that kind of leads into the next question is how do you tailor recovery to my son or really like to young men ages 17 to 28 like that? How do you tailor it to that person?
I think that's a mix of like taking the structure we already have in place. And excuse me, these criteria are all like built off all of our own experiences in recovery and in helping people to get sober. So there are like certain standards of getting a job or returning to school, or both, getting a sponsor, meeting certain criteria before you're driving, making sure you're taking your medication. These are all things that are, in my opinion, like both evidence-based and experientially for all of us have really helped people get sober. But then on the office side with the therapist, like each patient that comes in gets their own treatment plan. And so we're looking at what their goals are. We do a lot of clinical interviews when we're bringing somebody in of what they want to get out of this. And we try to do a good job of building a relationship to where they feel comfortable talking about what they really want out of life and then developing goals as a therapist with them to help them reach it. So that happens both with the family members actually and the patient. So it's a mix of like both the personal aspect of it and also leaning into the structure that exists.
Yeah.
I think all that fits really well. I also think that there's like a couple different ways that I feel like you reach a young guy, and there's one that doesn't sound as good that you have to do first. And whenever we're working with like say like a 18, a 20, a 21-year-old, it's like I need to just get this guy to buy into recovery and being sober, but he's still probably going to be immature. He's still going to have a lot of tendencies that aren't great. He's still going to be fixated on girls and video games and all that stuff. And like, first and foremost, I just have to get him bought into putting down drugs and alcohol and know that it's still not going to be a super pretty picture, but he's still 18 or 20 or 21 or 22. And just 6 months ago was, having a real rough time with drugs and alcohol. So I think just like managing expectations at first. But then it's funny how that changes where then after say they're with us for about a year, you start to see that switch flip that then it's more about career and job. And, I do think I'd want a family one day and how I can give back to 12 step. And I think it can kind of make that leap forward. And so one guy pops to mind that, got like a younger sponsor who was sober for 4 years, living the life, like dating women, finished school, but not really where parents I think would ultimately want their son. And now I think he's kind of pivoting to like, maybe I need like an older sponsor who is maybe more settled in his life, has things answered that I'm looking to answer for like when I turn 30 and when I turn 35, so that I'm working towards those goals now. So I think that kind of sums up like the approach I think for these guys is first and foremost, so I have to sell them on a life of like fun and that they don't have to give up everything. They just have to give up drugs and alcohol, and we'll kind of figure out the rest as they go.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, y'all covered a lot of good stuff. The only thing I would add to it is how difficult it is to walk the line of like tailoring care to someone and providing individualized treatment for a person versus like maintaining some sort of structure and routine for everyone involved in the program, because that they also thrive on that and doing things as a community. But then you'll get the complaint here and there from the guy of, well, I want to phase up early. I'm doing everything that I need to do. I deserve to go from phase 2 to phase 3 early. This is supposed to be an individualized program that is tailored to me uniquely. So sometimes we have to fight that battle a little bit of like, yeah, we are tailoring this program to you and your needs, especially clinically, but there's also this overarching program that would not be a program if we didn't have this unified front and structure and support and routine involved. I mean, I would say even in the past, we've had parents get confused on that of like, but this is an individualized program and you need to treat my son a certain way.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I feel like individualized program gets used to be just like basically I want what I want, and I don't like that your program doesn't allow it, and then individualization just I think kind of becomes the scapegoat for that of why they should be able to get what they want, even if I have a really good explanation as to why that's something that we don't allow and why we don't allow it. I think that it's also a slippery slope on some sense of like fairness and balance within a sober living, that all right, so now I allow this guy to have his computer, but I don't let this guy bring his computer. And he's like, well, that's messed up. Like, why can't I have mine? It's like, well, I know you've had a little more issues with yours and maybe you're just not ready for it. Like, you just get into so much of that kind of stuff. And I cannot tell you how much of that already exists in sober living, especially sober living with young men, of like this sense of like the staff's against us. They're doing this for one person, but not this for another. And looking for all the inconsistencies to point out, I think is like balanced and fair across the board as you can make it, is the best. And I even was just having a conversation with a guy about this, that like, I also have to think beyond the guys that are in the house right now, because there's a chance that I'll allow one of them to do one thing, and 6 months from now, in their last 2 weeks in the program, someone else will come in their first 2 weeks of the program, and they'll exchange the information that like, oh, well, he allowed me to do this 6 months ago. And then now that becomes the ongoing trend and precedent that's set for basically the rest of the program. Mm-hmm. Or else now, again, I'm doing this big injustice that it's like, well, you let people do that in the past, so now why won't you let me do it? And another good example is like, we allow overnights in the step up house, which is our phase 4. And I get this a lot where it's like, we have a 3-night limit to that. And they say, well, can I not just have 4 nights? Can I not just have 5 nights? You know, whatever the thing may be. But I think the couple times I've bent on that, immediately someone else is now asking me, well, he got to have 4 nights to go with his family. Why can't I have 4 nights to go to this rock concert? Or why can't I have 4 nights with my girlfriend? Or why can't I have 4 nights for whatever the other thing may be? And so it is just a really good position to be behind when you can say, hey, we just don't allow that across the board, not for family, not for rock concerts, not for whatever, so that no one feels like they're being targeted or being treated unfairly. And I can back up why that rule is for anyone, individually or group wide, now or 6 months from now, to just protect the integrity of the program long term. Sorry, I know that was a long rant.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that part of the treatment plan, you know, that's why we like structured it the way we did, was to help people like both appreciate their uniqueness, and also there is like a greater society you have to like partake in. You know what I mean? You can't just always do what you want to do. Just because you want to go 80 miles an hour doesn't mean you get to ignore the speed limit at 35, you know? And so just finding that balance there. You don't want to run it like a dictatorship necessarily, but there is a reason these structures are in place so society can function well. And how do you find yourself in that? You know?
Mm-hmm.
I've never met a young man come through our program that wasn't already used to splitting parents, and that could easily be transferred onto staff when they get to us of like, well, mom, you know, going to ask mom if I can spend the night, and mom says no. So then I run to dad and say, hey, well, mom said just to ask you, can I go spend the night with Lucas tonight? And that kind of mentality just comes to us right off the rip. So we have got to hold those boundaries somewhere, and it can't be completely individualized.
Yep.
Or tailored. Next question. Are we ready for that?
Yeah, dude.
This is going to fall a little more on Cole. The question is, what role does clinical care play alongside sober living support? Well, this is great for all of us to talk through, like, yeah, kind of what happens at the office and clinical support, and then what is happening on the sober living side. What kind of support are we doing there?
You want me to go first, Lucas, on the clinical side?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So this is to piggyback off in our previous answer of like taking the supports in place and how do you find yourself in there. So I would say the sober living in a lot of ways is, I mean, both of these are defining yourself is represented in both places. Don't get me wrong, but there are like certain standards for that you have to adhere to live in a sober living community in our housing. And then when you're here at the office, there are certain standards as well. Like you come to group, there's a certain level of respect that you have to like practice and show towards both the therapist and to the other members of the groups. Being on time for your session, being on time for your groups, and staying awake and alert and trying to get something out of it. I would say the role the clinical side does is like trying to get underneath like what's going on with the addiction. Why did you use? And then like, how do you find yourself now without being able to use, and where do you want to be? So like the past, present, future dynamic of it. And we try to have some like pretty interesting and insightful conversation where it's not literally just like, hey, just stop smoking or drinking. It's more of like, what makes you as a person who you are? Like, what do you really want in life? What do you really enjoy? And how can you be kind to yourself in the process? So, yeah, I think the other big role that therapists do is we're really trying to ascertain if there are any other like mental health things going on. The typical ones we see here at the office are ADHD, anxiety, and depression. Some combination of those usually for most of our patients. And that tends to be a bedrock in which the addiction or the substance abuse is trying to like help those symptoms. But if there's other things going on, like if you have like a schizophrenia, bipolar, any other type of like more, I wouldn't say, I mean, severe, I would guess would be the best way to describe it. Severe mental health conditions going on, being able to assess that, recognize it, and getting the proper support and care in place. I think in the very simplest way, it's just like helping the patients realize like therapy isn't scary. It's hard, but it's not scary. And therapists can be like a really important person in your life. It's not just for people in like one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Like we could all benefit from it. So just really normalizing therapy as a process. So those are some of the things that come to mind when I think about the role that the clinical side serves.
Yeah. And then on the sober living side and the support there, to me, clinical is much more of a mental preparation of how to deal with issues that are coming up. And sober living is much more life skills, physical preparation of like setting alarms, putting things in your calendar, making your bed. What is this?
Dude, this is why Lucas isn't answering the question.
I know. This
Here, do we?
dead silent over there. Because
Dude, you know what's also funny about that is it looks like two different people. I wish you could like edit one of those and give him a different colored shirt. Like it literally looks like it could be two different people.
no, it looks like Sid from Ice Age. I'm the little squirrel or whatever he is.
Sloth.
Sloth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry, dude. I've been working on stuff over here.
yeah, big important stuff. I'm just so glad that my picture isn't the one that ends up right there. I feel very grateful, very fortunate for that. That yours is the one that ends up like in the crack.
No, I think you were on it, Dave. I mean, I think that the therapy side is like really, and I don't mean either one to sound like, I think both are super important, but I think the therapy side can be very like theoretical and introspective and like kind of diving into the past and thinking about plans for the future while also learning how to stay in the present and what am I feeling? How could I have done this thing better? You know, I think there's so much, and like you said, like the mental side on that. And then I think the sober living is like very practical and putting that stuff to practice and to action. You know, once you leave that group therapy session, you practice in there relating with other people, practicing empathy, and again, not to ever make it sound like they don't do stuff in there, but then I think kind of the sober living feels more like you're going back into just like life, where you're going to outside meetings and you're talking to your sponsor, and things come up in the house of like who drank the last bit of the milk and put the carton back in there or whatever, and doing chores and how to show up and be disciplined and all that. And so I think that's in my mind where they kind of perfectly work with each other, is that one is like this practice. I mean, the sober living ends up being practice too, because you always get the next day in sober living to try it differently. But I think it's really this kind of theory versus practice.
Spot on.
Yeah, dude.
All right, next question. And this is one I'm going to rephrase it a little bit, and then I'll go into the question that was asked. But
Is it
one
inappropriate?
No, one question I get a lot on the phone is, what's your success rate? And I hate that question, because it's like, how do you define success? And really all we can do, and I feel like any other program that is telling you a definitive success rate is lying to you, because all you can do as a program is call people like 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, 3 years later, 5 years later. We'll keep running that number on out. You call and you ask, how are you doing? Are you still sober? And you're relying on their response. And our age group, a lot of them are even going to lie to you and just be like, yep, I'm good. Get me off the phone. Don't want to be talking to you anyway. So it's so hard. It's not like you're sending a drug test to that person, sending them to a lab to pee in front of someone to know for sure that they're still sober. They're like working their job. They have awesome relationships. You're just going on their word. So I don't think that any success rate that's posted out there is extremely accurate. But then the question really is, how do you define success for participants in your program?
I can take both.
All right.
I was just talking about this on Saturday night with one of the guys had asked me about it. And to date, we have worked with about 105 guys. This is pre-clinical office, but also half of that being clinical office. So all the way back to the sober living first starting, we've worked with 105 guys. I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head of how many of those are successful, how many relapsed, but I know that when I have done that in the past, and it was less guys than we have worked with now at around 105, this is probably when we had worked with 80 or 85, that of the guys that had finished the program. And I think that part's important, because what we are presenting is our program, and its length is designed to be a certain length for a reason. The intensity is designed to be it. So if you come and you leave after 1 month, it's just, I mean, I do take that as somewhat of a failure of the program on some level. We want to retain guys and keep them engaged and involved, and get them acclimated quick so that they do stay. But also, I feel like you didn't do our program. So these are just of the people that actually finished the program, whether that's the minimum of 7 months or most of them ended up staying longer. It was around 60 to 70% success rate. Now, what is success rate?
Can I piggyback on that answer real quick? Because I think you brought up a really good point. Like, some of it depends, like, what is the mission of Greenville Transitions, right? And we have like a pretty general statement of like, we want to help people. But I think it's a fair thing to say, like, our job is to expose families to recovery, expose them to recovery. We're exposers, you know what I mean? Like, we're trying to make sure they know what a meeting is, where a sponsor is, what it looks like to be successful in therapy, what it look like to do family therapy, what it look like to do a drug screen, what does it look like to live life sober, go to class sober, go to work sober, get a job sober. Like, what does that look like? And so that's to your point, Lucas, of guys that have been in the program long enough and families that have been involved long enough to get all those experiences, because you get those experiences if you're with us long enough. Then that parlays into that like 60, 70% success rate you were just talking about. All right, go on with your second answer.
Second answer is, what is success? And it's hard, because is success someone who gets sober at GT and stays sober for the rest of their life? I think that's a pretty narrow definition of success and lacks a lot of the nuance that we see in like real life of what that looks like. And so I just think there's a lot of in between. So there's guys I know of that would attribute GT to their success despite drinking the night that they left GT. One guy that I can think of, he drank in celebration of leaving GT, and I met with him. I kept in contact with him, like getting lunch and stuff. And so I would meet with him, and I'd be like, "Oh, how are things going? You still drinking, smoking pot?" I think were the main two things that he was back into. And I think at some point he was like, "Oh, despite drinking that first night, I think alcohol is just not for me. Like, I just don't even like the way it makes me feel and the taste and whatever." And so I think I'm going to stop that. And so we did, and met with him a couple months later. And that previous time I talked to him about marijuana and pot, and was like, I mean, how much money are you spending on it? Are you even feeling that high from it? I know you got this more serious relationship in your life, whatever. I didn't expect to convince him, but I was just kind of giving him my thoughts. And the next time we met up, he was like, "Oh yeah, I actually kind of took what you said to heart last time, and I quit smoking pot." I was like, "Oh, so you're clean and sober?" And he was like, "You know what? I guess I am." And that's the first guy that I've ever had that kind of accidentally stumbled back into sobriety without even realizing it. But I do think that guy came to us in drug-induced psychosis, like not knowing what was up and what was down. And so I think there was a lot of important stuff that happened with us, and a lot of important stuff that happened after, and from his sponsor and his family and all these different angles. So I think it's hard for even places to take full credit for someone's sobriety, like period, even if they are successful, because we know that it takes a village, and we know that it's the family changing, and maybe a sponsor coming alongside them, and a therapist, and friends they meet along the way, and so many different things. So I just think that question makes me ask 100 more questions rather than maybe give a clearly defined answer, because I just think there's so much nuance to it.
Thanks, Lucas. David, let me pick a bone with your stupid question, okay?
It's not stupid. It makes sense. I know why people ask it.
You know what I think, though? I think it's a representation of like what our clients do with substances. They're looking for an external solution to an internal problem. The reality is like statistics can only do so much to ease the anxiety and the grief and the fear that you have that a family member is going into treatment. That is an incredibly brutal, scary thing. And if you hear a favorable statistic, that might ease some of your anxiety. But the reality is that you can send somebody to the best program, whatever you want to call the best program, and they may not get and stay sober. And you can send somebody to the worst program, whatever you want to call the worst program. And there are people who have probably gone there and who have gotten and stayed sober.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like hard to say because there's just so many factors to that, to your point, Lucas. And so when families are asking that, they're looking for just some kind of external solution and comfort when there's so much internal turmoil, which isn't that dissimilar from what people do when they use substances. They're just trying to soothe internal turmoil. One thing I do think is super important for families to note is, does the program do what they say they're going to do? Like, do they call you back when they say they're going to call you back? Do they provide the services they say they're going to provide? Does the stuff on the website line up with the stuff that you actually see in person when you drop your family member off, or what reports you're getting? Does all that stuff line up? And also, what does your gut say? And you probably need to be in your own therapy figuring that out, by the way, because your gut sometimes sounds a lot like the fear in your mind, and vice versa. So figuring out what does your gut say about this program. And I know we have guys who haven't successfully completed our program, and parents who say, "Y'all are the best program. We love y'all." Because something in their gut told them that GT is a great program. And likewise, we have some parents who maybe are really upset with GT or really frustrated with GT. That happens too, So it's just a really hard question. It brings up a lot more questions with it. And I wish we could give like a better like external solution to that internal turmoil. But the best that we can do is just doing what we say we're going to do. And I do think we're all committed to that, like for our own integrity. So, yeah. All right, I'm done picking my bone.
And I know that can't be boiled down all the way, but if I had to, the same way when parents call me and they ask, "How do I know if my son has a problem?" and drugs and alcohol are involved, the key word is unmanageability. Say, how unmanageable is their lives? Are they managing school, their relationships, their job, all that stuff, their bills? And then if you asked me, what is success, or are they successful? Successful, I would ask the same thing. How manageable is their, are they managing the things in their life? Because I could think of another guy that we've had who came in for harder drugs, and now his life looks manageable, working on great golf courses. I think he's pretty sure he's drinking, but not back to the harder drugs. But like managing everything, like looks like he has a good relationship, has dogs, has a family going, looks like a good life going. So manageable and unmanageable. If I had to boil it down to words, those would be the words.
Yeah, because I just pulled up like a spreadsheet we've been working on to kind of better track this stuff. Because I think every once in a while we'll be like, all right, let's figure it out, and we just start writing it down on paper, and we come up with a number, and we do all the math, and all of it makes sense, and then we just throw the paper away again because we just don't put a whole lot of stock in that. But we've been working on something, and even going through it, it's like it's so frustrating because like guy number 1, successful completion, yes. Sober to this day, yes. Guy number 2, not successful completion and not with us today. Number 3 did not successfully complete, but is sober today. Next one did successfully complete, but is more like what you were just talking about, David, like kind of went back to some substances and has had way more manageability in his life, maybe drinking occasionally and smoking occasionally, but is not sober. But then hard to look at his life and be like, no, he's not a success just because of that. Despite like me kind of maybe having a feeling to do that because of that I needed to be fully sober. Next one, didn't successfully complete and no longer with us. Next one, didn't successfully complete. You know, so I mean, some of these are just so interesting that like maybe they finished the program, but they fell off right afterwards and had no intention of getting back on the wagon. And it was just, I'm going to do my time in this program, finish, and then I'm going right back to what I was doing. So there's just so much variability there that just makes a question that simplistic and like black and white kind of hard to answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough one. All right, ready to move on to the next one?
Sure.
Ready.
How are parents included in your recovery process?
And GTs?
Yeah. So this is like how mom asked this question. As she's looking into the program, she says, how are parents included in the recovery process? And we could kind of just touch on the importance of that.
Extremely important. Extremely important. I would say the parents are just they don't necessarily get the same face time that our clients do, because our clients are here for 6-7 hours a day, you know, when they first start the program. So they don't get the same face time, but the value is like, the importance is really pretty on par, I would say. But in short, when a patient comes into our sober living, they get an individual therapist, and they also work with all the therapists in our group program. But their parents also get a therapist that's working separately with them. So 2 therapists essentially on the case. And so that other therapist, who's the family support therapist, meets with their parents weekly at first, and then eventually it will phase down to every other week to once a month, eventually, as they go through the 7 months of our program. There's also a weekly family support group, and this is for parents of guys who are currently in our program or have gone through the program already. And so they meet weekly for an hour support group with one of our therapists, and it's virtual because parents are from all over the country. And then on the sober living side, there's also a lot of like touching base too. So they have family support sessions with a therapist, and they have the family group every week. And then Lucas, what about on the sober living side in terms of support?
Yeah, on the sober living side, parents get biweekly updates from either Scott, our program director, or myself on their son, how he's been doing, what's been good, what's been bad, what they need to work on. logistical stuff, upcoming visits, their phase update, what they need to do to get there, what's going to be expected in the next phase of the program. When is their car coming? When could they bring it? Like trying to cover all that kind of stuff, because there is so much of that when a guy is with us in the sober living, and parents need to know those answers for sure. But I also want that to be on the sober living side, so that therapists don't have to give those answers, and therapy time can be spent doing therapy about like, how do you feel? Again, what have things been in the past? What are you nervous about? Let's talk it through, rather than how's my son doing, and like what's going on with him. Like I try to take more of that, of what's going on with someone's son and how they're doing, so that in their therapy, they can talk about themselves and what's going on with them. And I think that's a tendency we see a lot, where parents become so externally kind of focused from like a survival standpoint for themselves and for their son, of like just always worried about their son, and I think kind of neglect themselves. And we're trying to break that pattern to where they do take time to focus on themselves and do things for themselves. Hopefully, like Cole said, having the trust and that gut feeling of like, I trust these guys and they've got it handled and under control. So I'm going to let go from that and I'm going to work on me. And the more they do that, it's like counterintuitive and crazy as I know that can sound to the average person, like coming into this process, the better things go, because the better the parents react to any situation that might pop up when they're with us. And we start to see stuff actually done different and make a change for the better because of it.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to it is that, I think there's a big misunderstanding for a lot of the families that come in that are saying, hey, I'm signing my son up for this, and my son needs to make some major changes. My son needs to change his behavior. And then they realize like, oh shit, I've got to change. There's a lot of things that I need to change to be able to support my son in the way that he needs, and to hold boundaries, and to like, as a parent, you get roped into a lot of manipulation, a lot of enabling, and a lot of things that just have to be cut out completely. And you need guidance in changing your behavior and ways that you are interacting with your son or daughter.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't you say that a lot of the families that come to us, they're like, no, I just want updates on him.
I wouldn't say a lot. I mean, there definitely are some, but it's interesting. I think a lot of times, though, for our patients, like they're pretty fortunate because they have parents that are really like being the guiding light and trying to make a change. They're so sick and tired of their kids struggling, they're just essentially falling on their face over and over again, and they really want things to do different. And they're just like, I'll do anything. They're so just like scared and burnt out. So I would actually speak to a lot of the parents, like do have pretty good motivation. The work is just hard. It's just hard. You know what I mean? And just because it's hard doesn't mean they don't want to do it. And I do think a lot of them would say like, yeah, I have made big changes, and it was my own recovery process. So
Yeah.
All
right. This next question I'm going to direct to you, Cole.
All right.
Because you have a special rule on this. But this question is, what if my husband and I are not on the same page on what our son needs?
This is very common. Very, very common. It's
Tell them the name of it.
Dude, I already talked about this once today already. Like, I really like patting this thing. We call it the 2/3 rule. The 2/3 rule. And you got to have 2/3 of the people motivated for the change to happen for it to really stick. And so the typical dynamic, the thirds, if you will, are the parents. So there's 2, and then the kid, the patient. So there's your thirds right there. And you have to have 2 out of 3 being motivated to like, this person like needs to be sober, needs help, needs care. If you only have 1/3 or 0/3, not a great success rate. If hardly ever a success rate. And what I mean by success in that, going back to your earlier question, is actually getting in treatment, staying in treatment, and being exposed to recovery concepts and really getting it. Like, that's what I mean by success. If you don't have the 2/3 rule going on, very low likelihood that success will be achieved. And so you and your husband got to get on the same page. What I'm saying, y'all got to get on the same page, because that rascal, your kid, ain't going to be one of the 2/3, by the way. Like, very rarely is it like the kid is It happens, but very rarely it's a kid, one of the people with like, hey, I really need to get help. I need to do this thing. They may say that. And then they're like, I just meant for like a couple of days. I just meant for like a week or maybe like a 30-day program. I didn't mean like doing this all the way, you know? So I'd say probably getting some like marriage therapy. You need to sit down and talk it out and figure out how to get on the same page. That's the best gift you can give your kid if they're struggling with it.
Would you add anything to that, Lucas?
No, not really. I mean, other than I just totally agree. And that I think that the 2/3 can sometimes shift. Sometimes we see one parent who falls out of it and the guy we're working with actually kind of steps up and fills that hole and is like, I actually do want it. And like, Dad, I think this is worth continuing to pay for. Or Mom, like, no, I really do like it here, you know, and for whatever different reasons, and there's a lot of them, one of the thirds will kind of fall out. And it always makes me think about that. I heard this recently, and I know it's just like kind of a trope going around, but someone asked someone like, hey, I think someone was like married for 40 years. And they said, how have you made it that long? And they said, we never gave up on the same day. And I feel like that's kind of the deal with this, you know, is that like, if the son is having a bad day, the parents need to kind of hold it together. And sometimes the parents will have bad days and the son steps up, and it's always really cool to see these different pieces of the puzzle show up for each other and show up for their collective family and like the better interest of the family's health long term. And those are the families that succeed, are the ones where not everybody gives up on the same day.
I love that. Very, very true.
Yeah,
and I will say, like, even our house right now, I can think of one where one of the thirds who is in favor of like getting help was one of the guys. You know, I was stunned. I'm always stunned when it happens, but it also gives me like hope for humanity when it happens. When I can tell like a parent's not really on board that this kid really need to get sober. Why can't he just be like a normal college guy? And then the kid's like, no, I have a problem. I really need help. I'm like, dang, okay. People can choose the hard thing to get better. Yeah, it gives me a lot of hope. I have a lot of gratitude for that when it happens.
Yeah.
All right. I have one more. Switching gears a little bit here, but what indicators do you look for to determine readiness for independence? So what are we looking for toward the end of our program, toward those final phases of like, okay, this guy is like, it's clicked. He's got it. Readiness for independence.
You know, there's something that a book talks about that calls it a psychic change. And I remember hearing that and being like, psychic, this is a good reason that I should not be a part of this group and definitely not keep reading this book. But psychic just meaning like of the mind. So like a mental change. And I think that I was just talking with some guys about this over the weekend in our program, that it's like one of those things that's kind of hard to measure and it's hard to track and it's hard to like put any metrics to it. But I feel like you just know it when you see it and you can like feel it. But I think the best way I could boil it down kind of comes to integrity, in the sense of that they're doing the right things and the things they need to be doing because they have bought in that that's what they need to be doing. And I think that a lot of times on the front end, we see more like even super compliant, like ready to go guys. They're doing everything they need to do, but why? And it's like, well, I just want to move through this program as quick as I can so I can get back to my dorm room and get back to my life and go back to the way things were. And at some point that kind of changes. And you hear that same guy be like, you know, I don't even know if I should go back to that dorm room because it's probably going to be hard for me to stay sober there. And you're like, oh, that feels really different, what they just said. Because this whole time I've just heard the quicker they get back, the better. And they'll get a job and they'll get a sponsor and they'll go to meetings and they'll do whatever. And yeah. No, it's all good. Tell me the next thing I got to do. And at some point you hear that change where like they make some really adult, mature, thought out decision of like, I don't think that's going to be the best thing for my recovery, despite that being the only thing that I've wanted for the past 6 months was to get back to that. And I don't know what you call that. A psychic change, integrity, buying in. And it's hard to I can think of a lot of different instances to describe it, but I don't know what exactly you call that. But that's what I think it is to me.
Yeah. What I would call it is humility and willingness. And what I mean by the willingness is being very proactive with one's self-care, being very proactive with how one spends their time, energy, and money. And it is also like have a very strong recovery focus and priority in it. So I think that's always like a really good indicator is there's like the motivation is high and they're proactively seeking out conversations with their sponsor, making sure their therapy scheduled, doing their routines of school, work, hobbies. That's always like really good. And then humility of when they invariably make missteps, they forget to call their sponsor. They forget to show up for that therapy session. They make a mistake on their schedule. They take ownership of it. They say, I'm sorry, I messed that up. I got to get better on that. I got to change this. And then they do that in a way that's very like humble with like a plan of action to not make the same mistake twice. So those two things I think are really important. It gives you a good indication that somebody's ready for independence because they're showing that they can self-manage and you don't have to do it for them.
Never mind. Cole put all the words to it, and I sign off on the words he put to it.
The words, just words.
Yeah, that's all really good stuff. Yeah, I think back to my own experience and of getting sober. And when I first went to treatment, first went to sober living, I was doing it for other people. I was doing this because, oh, my mom wants me here and fine, I'll do it. This is never going to work. This is so stupid was kind of my mentality, but I'm going to do it so that I can tell her that I tried it and that it failed. But at some point I hit that place where it was like, you know what? I believe that this lifestyle is going to work for me. And I think that's where you have to get to a place where you start to believe that this way of life is going to work for you and benefit you. And once you realize that, that's the psychic change.
Mm-hmm. I can remember the first time I was probably at like 8 or 9 months sober, probably somewhere around there. And I was at a grocery store and I saw the beer aisle and just, I didn't just walk past it. I walked into it and then I was like looking at the different beers and seeing what had changed and if there were any new ones out and whatever. And then I started to play the tape forward because now I was living by myself. So maybe I was a little over a year sober, but I was living by myself for the first time since being sober. And I was like, man, nobody would know. My parents are a state away. They're back in Charleston. I was in Asheville at the time. I was like, I could definitely hold it down to where they wouldn't know. And I was like, well, what about work tomorrow? And I was like, I could always just call in a little late if I'm not feeling good in the morning, but I could limit it to Fridays and Saturdays and whatever. And I kind of got to this point where I was like, man, nobody would know. And then like a lightning bolt, it crashed into me, but I would know. And for the first time in my life, that actually mattered, that I would know and that I wouldn't be doing what I said I was doing. And I would be giving up on this whole way of life and whatever. And I know some of that can sound kind of corny, but I think that was a big turning point for me where it actually mattered that I would know when my whole life had been based around, would anyone else know? Could I get away with it? What excuse could I make? Could I tell a lie here, then tell a lie there? Could I fake a drug test? Could I sneak out late enough? Could I get back in time? Like everything was all these just like logistics of how I could hide it from people. And for the first time ever, yeah, it just actually mattering to me and only me. If no one else in the world knew, it would matter to me that I did it.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yep.
Love it.
Well, that is all we have today for Mustache You a Question. Read it and weep, people. Look at that bad boy. I want it noted that it was here. My wife's about to make me take it off. Look at this thing.
It's not bad.
It's good, dude.
I don't know why you hate on it.
Well, he's always changing it, man. He can't decide what he's doing. He pulls it off well, though. You look good, dude.
Sure.
I appreciate that.
But just just one more time. Where are we at? Just one more time. Hold on. I had something to show y'all.
Oh my gosh. Are you adding another picture of David's split face in the chat?
This is important stuff here.
Just one more time.
All right, chat. Smash that like button. Donate coins. If you want the sloth, let us know.
Do it for the
And
sloth.
we're out.